Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. I am coming to you a day late because Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I was out of town. And I could record these shows in advance, but the reality is there's so much going on in Texas that I kind of need to come to you the week of because there's more relevant and pertinent information. So I decided to just delay the release of this week's episode a day. So thank you for your patience. One of the things we're going to talk about today is whether or not the legislature is killing E-Verify legislation, or will this legislation actually have a chance to become law, policy that is strongly supported by a vast majority of Republicans in this state? Let's get to the show. Last session, the issue of E-Verify was not addressed in the Texas House at all. And when it comes to the Texas Senate, there was Senate Bill 1621 by Senator Lois Kolkhorst. It was also a bill that was co-authored by Senators Creighton, Hall, and Middleton. This was a fantastic piece of legislation that has been strongly supported by the Republican Party. The state of Florida passed a similar bill within the last year or two. I know we do speak on the show at times on policy that other states pass that we need to prioritize in this state. And so that piece of legislation was at least heard in the Business and Commerce Committee on April 11th, which, if you put that to today's timeline, it'd literally be like a hearing happening tomorrow. It was left pending, and then it was actually voted out in early May. That is very late in the session to get a bill across the finish line. But the good news is that every Republican except for Robert Nichols voted the bill out. It passed committee last session 7-4. It passed in early May. It was put on intent, and it never got to the Senate floor. Now, just to kind of explain to you the behind-the-scenes process of how a bill stays on the intent calendar without actually being able to get brought up, is that during that session, there were two Republican senators. If two Republican senators oppose a piece of legislation, it wouldn't come to the floor because you have to suspend the rules with the blocker bill that they have. And so if two Republican senators oppose a bill, that's enough to keep it from moving. So when conservative legislation gets to the intent calendar, the question for the caucus and for all the Republicans is, who is or is not on board with this policy? Now, last session, we don't know exactly who was not supportive of the policy, but we know that enough senators were not on board with E-Verify, Republicans. So in addition to Robert Nichols, who publicly voted no in committee, there had to have been a couple other senators, one or two or three more, also who had reservations on the policy. And so it never actually made it to the Senate floor for a vote. On the House side, the issue of E-Verify did not come up, was not addressed in any serious way. That's what happened in 2023. So now let's fast forward to where are we today? Today, Senator Kolkhorst has filed a bill like Senate Bill 1621. This year, her bill is Senate Bill 324. Often, good conservative policy that gets filed the session before makes it a little way through and dies, gets a lower bill number because that Senator Kolkhorst, who I've lauded on this program, I'm a big fan of Senator Kolkhorst, but she refiled that bill and refiled it quickly. Mike Alcott filed an identical version of her bill, HB 3210, and we will get to that in a second. But the great news for Texans already is that currently Senator Kolkhorst not only has Senator Halls and Middleton as co-authors of her bill, but also Adam Hinojosa. Now, what would be the significance of freshman Senator Adam Hinojosa supporting E-Verify? Senator Morgan Lamontia is a Democrat from the Rio Grande Valley who was defeated by Adam Hinojosa in the last election. And the reason his co-authorship is significant is because it shows that the issue of E-Verify already has a vote that it definitely didn't have last session. And not only that, the number of Republicans that you need to kill a bill because Adam Hinojosa won is now 3 and not 2. So they will need not only Senator Nichols, but 2 other Republicans to say, we oppose E-Verify as a policy. As a reminder, E-Verify ensures that less illegals are taking Texas jobs. And there's actually two reasons why this issue is so important to me, and I think to many of you this session. Donald Trump is trying to facilitate the largest deportation program in the history of the United States of America, which is very important and very necessary for the long-term endurance of our nation and state. And part of what he and Vice President J.D. Vance have talked about is self-deportation. So not only when we capture a criminal illegal alien and deport them back to their country of origin, not only when we take a criminal in our system and send them to El Salvador. By the way, side note, David Lowe, he is a freshman representative from Tarrant County, sent a fantastic letter to a various number of state officials saying that we currently have quite a few illegal aliens who are in our prison system for life. They have life sentences. And he did the math on what the Trump administration is paying the prison system of El Salvador for the illegals that they sent to El Salvador. And if we only take the criminal illegal aliens that have life sentences and send them down there, we are going to save, I can't remember what his letter said, but it was tens of millions of dollars that Texans will save simply by sending them down to El Salvador to serve out their life sentences there. A fantastic idea, and I'm very grateful that Representative Lowe brought that up to everyone's attention as a possible solution that Texans should be looking at for the criminal illegal aliens that we are housing in our prison system and paying substantial taxpayer dollars to have. Back to E-Verify. One of the important things of E-Verify is not just that an illegal alien is taking the job of a Texas citizen that they would otherwise have. Not only are they also driving down the wage market so that the average Texan in a service industry job would make more for those jobs as you reduced the illegal workforce, which would make it more possible for those individuals to maybe actually have a working class job that you could buy a home with, right? And we'll get to the homestead exemption just in a little bit of the importance of affordable housing when it comes to that policy. But not only is it about the jobs, it is also about creating an environment where self-deportation is more seriously considered by the millions of illegals currently here in the state. The harder you make it for them to get a job that a Texan would otherwise have, the more likely they are to consider returning to their country. E-Verify is a very, very important policy that Texans know needs to be addressed this session. If it doesn't get addressed this session, it's not happening until next session, and it's not even going into enforcement until September of 2027. That's like the last year and a half of the Trump administration will have E-Verify in Texas. Unacceptable. So what we know now is that bill is in Business and Commerce just like it was last time, that Adam Hinojosa is now a co-author, which means that the threshold of now 3 senators needed, Senator Nichols and 2 other Republican senators would have to oppose this to not be able to get it to the floor of the Texas Senate. But unfortunately, it has still yet to receive a hearing in Business and Commerce. Now, last session, Senator Schwartner did hear this bill and voted it out and voted for it. But unfortunately, he has not moved at the pace he even moved at last session. And as I started in my description, last session, this bill moved late. And this session, if it moves, it's moving even later, which makes it even harder to pass. My hope would be that Senator Schwartner hears this bill very soon, because if he doesn't, it is going to look like he is helping facilitate the killing of this policy. Senator Schwartner has voted for E-Verify in the past. I hope he still supports it. I don't know why this bill has not received a hearing, but it is really important. And one of the things I like to do is bring the most important issues to your attention so that y'all know what's going on. And Senate Bill 324 right now is sitting in the Business and Commerce Committee in the Texas Senate, and it needs to move. Pure and simple. And what you should do is you should call your senator and ask them if they support E-Verify. Ask them if they'll co-author Senate Bill 324 and show their public support. And if you know Senator Schwartner, you should reach out to him and his staff and ask them to hear this bill because it is a very important policy that needs to move. So that's in the Texas Senate. Now let's move over to the Texas House. And I talked about this briefly several weeks ago when I was giving an update on various different policies. But in the Texas House, every E-Verify bill except for one has been sent to the State Affairs Committee. And the State Affairs Committee looks like the place where the speaker will send a lot of Republican policy to die. I'm not saying it is that place because the truth is there's still 8 weeks and the State Affairs Committee could still vote out a lot of conservative policy, just like the Business and Commerce Committee could vote out E-Verify in the next couple weeks too. But right now, the State Affairs Committee has not seemed to be a committee that is actively working to advance a lot of Republican policy. And Dade Phelan is on that committee, and Charlie Geren is on that committee, and Drew Darby's on the committee, and the chair is Ken King. You have 4 Republicans that are amongst, I would argue, the 10 most liberal Republicans in the legislature. 4 of the 10 most liberal Republican legislators are on the State Affairs Committee. And you need all of them to support your bill to get a Republican bill out. So you tell me the chances that E-Verify has to come out of State Affairs. The one bill that got sent to a different committee, sent to the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, is House Bill 323 by Representative Spiller. And this is regarding new employees of political subdivisions, school districts, cities, and counties. Now, this bill would be, and I think I said this as a precursor last time, Representative Spiller also has legislation that is full E-Verify as well, I believe, and has supported legislation in the past that is full E-Verify. So Representative Spiller supports E-Verify in its entirety from everything I have ever seen, but also has this more narrow bill. But this bill is so narrow that I think it might be defined, if it was to pass, as the smallest E-Verify program ever passed in the history of America. It is only for new employees of political subdivisions, okay? So you could say E-Verify across the state. That's businesses that just do business. That's businesses that do business with governments. That's government employees, current and new. That's all these buckets of people. You're saying E-Verify. This one says only for new employees of political subdivisions. So if your ISD is currently hiring 20 illegals and those people are on course to get a pension and have all this stuff, they're keeping their job. In fact, you've actually created an incentive for them to never go try to find another job because there might be E-Verified, but they won't be E-Verified as long as they're sitting there, right? And so the illegal will stay in the job they have for as long as humanly possible at that moment in time, if that's the way the program is instituted. It's such a narrow bill. There are conservative advocates who have been fighting to see how much that bill can be expanded. One of the things you have to understand, though, is that you can only expand a bill so much. You can't take a small bill that says this bill is here to regulate certain things within nurse practitioners. And you can't take the nurse practitioner bill and say, hey, let's change this into a bill that addresses entire procedures within Texas public hospitals. Okay? That's 2 different complete subjects. And there are all these parliamentary precedents that kind of give you guidance to how much you can or cannot expand a bill. Now, the thing about the Texas House is, remember, Dustin Burrows kept Hugh Brady, the Democrat, on his staff, who's basically perverted the rules to make it much harder to pass conservative policy, and seems to also be more likely to rule often against conservative policy than he is to hold the same standard when leadership is doing something that grows government. But and he's not the quote unquote parliamentarian, but he's literally like the man behind the curtain, so everybody knows that he's highly involved in the whole parliamentary process. The bill that is currently there, House Bill 323, is so small that it hardly does anything, but there could potentially be opportunity to expand it to a broader set of government employees and contractors, but keeping it within the confines of people who do business with the government. Then there are the multiple E-Verify bills that are stuck in state affairs and not getting heard, and probably not going to get heard, but they could, and they should. And I hope that Chairman Ken King is willing to hear those bills and move them out because Republicans should pass Republican policy. I wanted to give you this E-Verify update so you understand this is a policy that many of you care about, and currently both sides of the legislature aren't really actively working on this issue. And if one of them doesn't get started really soon, it will die. And Texans at least deserve to know that before it happens so that you can further engage in this issue. Before we move on to a couple other topics, I do want to tell y'all about a new show that's been on Texas Core called Real Texans. And this is a Sunday show where Michael Quinn Sullivan sits down with various different individuals. You can watch episodes on X. You can go to YouTube and watch the episodes. I particularly liked the conversation with House Representative Richard Raymond, who is a Democrat. He is one of the Democrats that voted against Dustin Burrows, but he's also one of the most senior Democrats in Texas. He has been in the legislature for a very long time, serving from South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley. Donald Trump just won his district by like 0.3%. He's probably, in my opinion, the most conservative Democrat in the legislature. And I think that conversation that Michael had with Richard Raymond was fascinating. Y'all should go back and watch it. I think it's 3 weeks old. He just recently interviewed Representative J.M. Lozano, who I've had on this show as well, who is a member who started as a Democrat and then moved to the Republican Party, served under House speakerships, and was always a more moderate to liberal Republican member. And in the last couple of years has had a real conservative awakening and has come out as a staunch conservative stalwart voice, and does a very good job articulating kind of the process by which an elected official starts to recognize different changes that are happening in their perspective. We tell a lot of stories about people who start good and go bad, but it's really worth the time to appreciate when people get elected and actually improve in their worldview and the principles that they hold and the policies that they will advocate for. Representative Lozano has my utmost respect, and I really do appreciate the testimony that he's given to so many Texans. There's a Real Texans interview with Michael Quinn Sullivan and J.M. Lozano as well. That show in general is something that I think has brought a good perspective and a new twist to a lot of the stuff that Texas Scorecard is pushing out. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all were aware of that and knew to take advantage of it. I think y'all will really enjoy some of the episodes that are out there. One of the things I do want to talk about is the fact that as I'm recording this, the Texas House budget is going on. And just so y'all get a little bit of perspective, the budget does not provide a substantial amount of property tax relief on either side. That's something that a lot of people are frustrated about. It does grow spending significantly and substantially, and that's unfortunate as well. I will say that conservative Republicans are trying to amend the budget in various ways, not only to increase property tax relief, but there's a number of other issues. One thing I'll bring to your attention is the fact that the fights that many of these conservative members are having are already having an impact. Andy Hopper posted, he said, "Do you think it's coincidence that literally hours after I filed an amendment to the House budget, which will get voted on today, by the way, and this amendment depriving UT Austin of funding because of their DEI curriculum," and that's what it did. It said, we're going to defund these issues, and his reasoning was they've got DEI, that they issued a policy change no longer requiring such classes for students. And there's literally a letter from UT within hours of him filing his amendment. "Dear UT community, we are committed to providing our students with critical tools, learning opportunities, and skills that allow them to thrive in their careers and lives beyond the 40 acres. That was one of the founding principles that led to the creation and implementation of these skills and experience flags nearly 2 decades ago." This is a 2-decade-long DEI program. "The flags were designed to supplement the core curriculum with additional required education to help ensure that all UT students could communicate effectively, engage in independent problem solving, understand the world, and more. Although flags have played a key role in the UT academic experience for the past 18 years, the world has evolved significantly for our students, and careers of the future look increasingly different from those of the past." I know this is kind of wordy, but whenever a institution like UT backs away and eliminates a leftist program, they do so in a very wordy manner. Okay, that's just how it works. This is still from the letter from UT. "After extensive discussion and analysis and review of Andy Hopper's amendment," they didn't say that. I'm ad-libbing there. I'm editorializing. The university has decided to discontinue the flags requirement. Effective today, students will no longer need to complete flag courses. However, the core curriculum mandated by the State Higher Education Coordinating Board remains a requirement, including the core writing requirements. All UT students who currently have incomplete flag requirements will no longer need to take those courses to be eligible to graduate. There's about 4 more paragraphs, but I don't need to tell you what they are. Flags was a DEI course that UT literally came out and canceled within hours of Andy Hopper filing his amendment that said, we're going to take money away from UT because of the DEI they are forcing students to take with mandated classes. And the day this happened, was talking to a student of UT that told me, this is literally one of the 4 required classes I need to take to graduate, and I haven't been taking it because it's leftist garbage. I just saved a class. I still have to write this thing up or something, but I don't have to take this Marxist class. This is why you should be grateful that people like Andy Hopper are new freshmen, and they're not just sitting down and shutting up. They're not just sitting down and saying, I don't want to become part of the process. They're not just sitting down and saying, I can't actually speak into the budget process. They're willing to go and fight for it. And that has been incredibly helpful and has literally led to a real victory where the University of Texas had to cancel this DEI required course. Huge, huge victory. There's a number of other things that will get discussed, but one of the things that will be discussed today is a amendment by Representative Mitch Little, which says that the Texas House needs to pay back the Attorney General what they owe him for the time that he was not allowed to be AG as a result of his impeachment. And this, I think, amounts to something, it's $63,750. This money was taken from Ken with a false impeachment. And so Mitch Little has substantial support for this amendment, and that will be probably one of the most important budget votes that happens. One of the things that we have talked about on this show at times over the last 2 years is the difference between M&O compression and homestead exemption. And I am going to briefly describe to you, because this will be a policy discussion that is had for the next decade, in my opinion. My position for those of you who didn't hear my episode 2 years ago that I did on this. But ultimately, there are 2 positive and productive ways to eliminate property taxes and or provide property tax relief. Primary vehicles. One is the homestead exemption and one is M&O compression. Now, I will tell you that a lot of conservatives prefer M&O compression, and I will try to steelman their position. Okay, but Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, which is an organization I've talked about a lot, Texas Public Policy Foundation, and various other conservative individuals have always said that they prefer M&O compression as the best vehicle to provide property tax relief. And what they will tell you is that they believe that the property tax bucket as a whole, basically what M&O compression is it's the state sending $1 billion or $1 million or $10 billion in the form that buys down. It is funding to the public education system that buys down the amount that they collect of the levy from you. Okay? And it literally is a completely equal reduction across the board in every single person that's paying property taxes. Okay? So if you own a high rise in downtown San Antonio, if it's your home, if it's a strip center, if it's a lot that you have, if you just picked up a couple acres, all of these things, if you own a rental home, okay, I own several rental properties, it's taking every single property and saying we are going to reduce all of it a certain percentage, okay? And then honestly, that would give a greater discount to the higher valued properties, right? So it might be a $50 reduction for $1 billion on your property, and it might be a $20 reduction for somebody who's got a really small little property or a little townhome that doesn't even have, a full lot, and it might be a $5,000 reduction for the person who has a high rise, but that also might be that they have a, $250,000 property tax bill. Okay? So it's the same percentage. It's an equal reduction across the board. And what they would tell you is that that is the best way to ultimately try to eliminate property taxes. That's what they believe, which is that you just keep taking it one bite at a time. And we need to cap what local governments can increase beyond the 2.5% down to 0 without voter approval, which will mean that every time we take a little bite, it goes further and further down. And eventually, at a certain period of time, you could potentially suck the bucket dry and have no more school property taxes, which is about half of your property tax bill. So half of your property tax bill could go away. That is M&O compression. A homestead exemption is basically taking the same amount of money and concentrating it on people who have homesteads. So many of you only own one home. And if you do not have a homestead exemption on your home, that is your own problem. I don't have charity towards you. That's been your mistake. Go file a homestead exemption with your appraisal district and get the homestead exemption. Because what a homestead exemption does is it takes the first $100,000 of value and it takes it off the rolls, right? And you'll hear this in Lieutenant Governor Patrick's video that we will play in just a second. But what you need to understand is that homestead exemption ends up giving it concentrates all of the property tax relief on home owners and on the home they own. So if the legislature passes an increase in the homestead exemption, that will significantly lower the cost of the home I own and live in. But it will not decrease the property taxes of the duplex I own, the rental home I own, the lot I own. It will not decrease the property taxes of that property. Now, I personally believe that the homestead exemption should always be part of any property tax relief discussion because it is the best way to ultimately get to a point to where most Texas homeowners are not renting their home from the government. Okay? I would love it if our governor and lieutenant governor and House Speaker and everybody would sit down and say 90% of every single bit of surplus that we get goes to property tax relief. We have a $23 billion surplus, and I think we're going to end up spending $6 to $7 billion of that on new property tax relief. I don't think that's enough. If they would take $20 billion of that, it would have a massive impact. And in the event that we're having that discussion, I'm very open to saying 3/4 of that should go to M&O compression and 1/4 should go to a homestead exemption. But recognize that one of the problems we have in Texas is that the average working class family is having a harder time in many of the larger cities in being able to afford to buy a home. And homeownership is a core part of what we should strive to have as an achievable goal for almost every Texan. That's what we should have as a goal in our public policy making. We should say that we want a working class family to be able to buy a home and live in that home and have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms that they could actually maybe have 3 or 4 children in. We wouldn't want people stuck in an apartment saying, I just can't be able to get a home and I'm not sure if I want kids until I can have a home, which by the way, they shouldn't. If you live in an apartment and you're thinking about having kids, have kids. Don't wait. We have this societal problem where everybody wants to wait till they have their student loans paid off and live in a home and do all this stuff before they have children. Okay. And that is not the way we should think about having children, bringing them into the world. That is not the way all of human history has thought about the process and timeline of bringing children into the world. They got married, and part of the natural occurrence of marriage was that children were a byproduct of that, and that is a blessing. And as somebody who is not sleeping a lot right now, I can tell you that you will have times of not being sure that it is as much of a blessing as you always thought it was, but it is. Your life will have so much more meaning if you start to bring children into this world. You will look at life differently and will make you a better person. So please don't wait. And if you know people that are waiting, just encourage them. Don't beat them up, but just encourage them. Guys, families are what make life purposeful. Have a family. But on the policy side, you know what we should have as a goal? That person being able to buy a home. For most people, that's their wealth generation. There's those of you who haven't been saving in your IRA. You don't have a great retirement, and you should focus on those things too. But for a lot of people, they buy a home, and that ends up being the thing that gives them $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 to give to their children when they pass away. So this has to be a goal, and I will tell you, as we get this homestead exemption higher and higher and higher, it will eliminate school property taxes for a lot of Texans. And every time you increase it, it'll eliminate school property taxes for more Texans. And so with that being said, I do want to show y'all a video that our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick produced on homestead exemption versus M&O compression so you can understand why I and others prefer this method as this discussion and debate goes on this session. Let's go to this video.
Hi, I'm Dan Patrick, proud to be your Lieutenant Governor. Today I want to talk about property tax relief because it's on everyone's mind in depth. The difference between compression and homestead exemption, which we favor in the Senate, with just a little compression. So what better way to do it with a game that we've all played, the game of Monopoly? It has a lot in common to property taxes, compression, and homestead exemptions. Let's take an historic look at homestead exemptions and compression. First of all, when I became Lieutenant Governor in 2015, the homestead exemption was only $15,000. It barely made a dent in how much money you saved on property taxes. So in my first session, the Senate and myself took the lead and we raised it to $25,000. And then a few sessions later, we raised it to $40,000. And last year, it was historic. We took the homestead exemption for you and everyone who homesteads their property to $100,000. And if you're a senior, to $110,000. You can look back at your bill and you'll see that even though your appraisal has gone up, your school tax bill has gone down by about 41%. But my goal is to get rid of it this session for almost every senior in the state and eventually for every other homeowner. So let's take a look at the game that everyone knows how to play and how it ties into property tax relief in Texas. Everyone knows the game of Monopoly is about you buying property. You hope to get like Boardwalk and Park Place or whatever you can get. But no matter what the property is, every time someone lands on your space, you're paying rent as long as the game lasts. Well, today, if we don't do more about reducing your property taxes and eliminating your school property taxes, it's the same as Monopoly. You may have paid off your home or have very little left on your payments, but you're paying, in essence, rent from your school districts for the entire time you live in the house. And that's what we're going to stop this session for seniors. So this session, the Texas Senate already took action in February. Taking a look at this slide, you'll see that Senate Bill 4, we've increased the homestead exemption for school taxes from $100,000 to $140,000 and $150,000 for senior. But wait, there's more. But in talking with the Speaker, I think we're on the same track of increasing the homestead exemption for seniors this year, not to $150,000, but to $200,000. So that means for all of our seniors who own homes in Texas, when we raise the homestead exemption for you this session to $200,000, for the average senior homeowner in Texas, you will not be paying any more school taxes. We will achieve that goal for you this session. So now let's compare compression. And for those of you who aren't sure what that is, that's actually compressing or cutting down the school tax rate to cut your taxes, compared to homestead exemptions, which I've always been a champion of and has the Senate as well. So compression. For every $1 billion that we spend of state money to cut property taxes through this system called compression, let's look what you get. You get 3 of these. On Monopoly money, if you remember, these are not 500s. These are not hundreds. These are blue $10 ones. So for every billion, you only get of compression a $30 savings. Now, how about a homestead exemption? 10. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 130. Do you want a $30 cut in your school taxes for $1 billion of state spending? Or do you want 130? Easy. We're all going to take this. And there's another major difference between compression and homestead exemption. Compression is a roll of the dice. So the difference is compression is a roll of the dice because it's only in state law. It's not in the Constitution. So any future legislation could take all of it back, and your property taxes would go up. But homestead exemptions, you remember in November 2023, 83% of Texans voted for the $100,000 homestead exemption. Homestead exemptions are in the Constitution. They can never be taken away from you. Now, one word. The Senate has supported some compression. It's good across the board for everyone, but it can't be the major part of your tax cut because remember, you only get $30 for every billion and you get $130 for every billion for a homestead exemption. As we wrap up our Monopoly game, let's remember the goal. In Monopoly, Every time you land on a space that has a house, you have to pay rent. Well, in Texas, as long as you live in your home, you have to pay school taxes. And our goal is to eliminate those totally for everyone. And this session, working with the speaker, I believe we can do that for seniors. For the average senior living in Texas with a homestead property, if we increase the homestead exemption to $200,000, it will basically wipe out all school taxes forever for the average senior homeowner. Tell your members, tell your House member, your senators, it's time to eliminate all school taxes for seniors by giving them a $200,000 homestead exemption, and it's time to support increasing the homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000 for everyone under 65, so they see more and more cuts to their school taxes. Thank you. Dan Patrick, proud to be your Lieutenant Governor.
So I hope that you now understand a little bit more where I'm at when it comes to my support for the homestead exemption. And like I said, I've debated this with my friend Andrew McVeigh at Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, with some of the policy analysts at Texas Public Policy Foundation, with, Bill Peacock and Van Skyn and some other people. Everyone has their opinions. But I believe that the homestead exemption is the preferred vehicle. That doesn't mean it's all homestead, all M&O, whatever. But I do believe that ultimately, when I meet conservative lawmakers across the state of Texas, you know what they tell me? My voters are getting taxed out of their homes. That is the crisis. And actually, by the way, that crisis matters more than the office building. It just does. If office rent is going up a little bit because the property taxes are increasing on office buildings, I don't like that. But that is less of a crisis than a working class family saying, I can't afford this home because my property taxes are $6,000 and I think I might have to sell it. Or my mortgage just went up because my property taxes went up and my mortgage and my insurance costs went up. And now I have another $250 while I haven't gotten a raise because the economy's not going gangbusters and the cost of goods has gone up over the Biden inflation. That's not a good place to be. And Texas should prioritize providing relief to that person, which is why the homestead exemption is my preferred vehicle for relief. I think I've beaten that horse well enough so for you to understand my perspective and position, but I will let y'all know what ultimately the property tax package comes out to be. I unfortunately think it is not going to be big enough on either side, but I hope that in the course of the negotiations, they're able to increase the total amount of relief given to be a little more substantial and hopefully more helpful to the average family in Texas. May God bless you this week, and may God bless Texas.